My name is Naomi Calder. I'm 28, and I'm a landscape architect in Boulder, Colorado. The kind of job that sounds peaceful until you're arguing with a client about whether ornamental grass counts as too wild, while your phone buzzes with someone else's expectations. I own a small townhouse, nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, a narrow garage, a little patio. I've actually made beautiful. Because when you design outdoor spaces for a living, your own place feels like a resume you live inside. I didn't grow up with money. I built mine the slow way. Long hours, messy boots, sunburned shoulders, and the quiet satisfaction of watching my drawings turn into real stone paths and clean lines of native plants. I worked at a big firm right out of college, saved like my life depended on it, and went independent 3 years ago. Now I'm at the point where I have too many projects and not enough hours. I'd been thinking about hiring an assistant. And if I'm being honest, I think that's why my boyfriend started looking at me like a ladder instead of a partner. His name was Evan. He was 26, worked in event planning, and always looked polished, like he could step into a photo without warning and still come out flawless. We met at a friend's housewarming party 2 years ago. He had this easy charm, that warm laugh that made people lean in. He told me he loved how driven I was. I told him I loved how alive he seemed in a room. The first year was good, easy even. Hikes on weekends, Thai food nights, hosting little game nights with friends. He fit into my life smoothly. Looking back, maybe too smoothly, like he'd watched other couples and learned the lines. My best friend Colin didn't buy the performance. Colin's known me since high school. He works construction, speaks in blunt truths, and has a talent for saying the thing everyone else politely avoids. About 6 months into my relationship with Evan, Colin leaned against my kitchen counter, grabbed a sparkling water from my fridge like he lived there, and said, "He's cool and all, but you notice how he perks up when you talk about work or money?" I rolled my eyes. "He's interested in what I do." "No," Colin said, staring at me like I was missing the obvious. "He's interested in what your life can become." I laughed it off. Because Evan was affectionate, we rarely fought, and on the surface, everything looked fine. Then year 2 started doing what year 2 always does. It stopped letting you hide behind the honeymoon glow. It began small. Evan would sigh when I worked late. He'd make little comments about my Thursday night basketball group. "Yes, I still play. Yes, I'm terrible. And yes, it's sacred." "Don't you think," he'd say, dragging the words out like they were thoughtful, "you should be networking more, meeting people who can help you grow?" "My friends help me grow," I'd answer. He'd smile, tight, quick. "I just want more for you, for us." That line, "for us," became his favorite weapon. It sounded romantic until you realized it meant, for the version of us I've already planned without asking you. The real shift happened around month 20. Evan stopped talking about the future like it was a possibility and started talking like it was a schedule. When we get married, when we have kids, when we buy a place in the mountains. I wasn't against any of those things someday, but he spoke like they were items on a checklist, and I was running behind. Then came the comparisons. His friend's boyfriend got promoted. Someone bought a house in the foothills. Another couple announced they were building a brand. Suddenly, my growing business, the one that had me outside in the dirt and in meetings and in budgets and in deadlines, wasn't impressive. Not enough. Not fast enough. "Maybe you should expand quicker," he said one night, curled on my couch like he owned it. "Hire more people. Take on bigger projects." "I'm growing sustainably," I told him. "I'm not trying to blow up and crash." He tilted his head. "Or you're just scared of taking risks." That one hit, because I'd taken risks my whole life. Going independent, buying my own place young, betting my future on my own ability to deliver. But to Evan, none of that counted unless it looked like a highlight reel. 3 weeks ago, it all came to a head. We were supposed to meet for dinner after I finished a client presentation. The meeting ran long, because clients always want to debate every pebble like it's a philosophical crisis. I texted Evan, "Running 30 late, sorry." When I arrived, he was already at the restaurant, sitting upright, jaw tight, fingers tapping his water glass like it personally offended him. "I'm sorry," I said, sliding into the booth. "They wouldn't stop." "We need to talk," he cut in. Those words don't belong to happy dinners. They belong to breakups and betrayals. I felt my stomach drop anyway. He stared at the table more than he stared at me, like he'd memorized a script and didn't want to lose his place. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he began. I waited, quiet, watching his hands, watching his face, watching the way his eyes kept flicking away whenever my expression didn't give him the reaction he wanted. "The thing is," he said carefully, "I feel like we've grown in different directions." A slow exhale. "You're content," he continued, voice smooth. "And I need someone who pushes boundaries. Bigger ambitions. Someone who wants more." I stared at him for a long beat. 2 years, holidays, family gatherings, late nights, plans. And he was breaking up with me because I wasn't ambitious enough, while sitting across from me in a restaurant I arrived late to because I was literally building my career. Then he delivered the line like he expected applause. "I care about you," he said, softer now, "and I don't want to lose you completely. So I think we should just be friends." There it was. Just be friends. The downgrade disguised as kindness. The door left cracked open in case he wanted to walk back through later. Old Naomi might have argued, might have begged, might have tried to prove my worth like it was negotiable. But something in me went still. Cold clarity. I nodded once. "All right," I said calmly. "Friends it is." He blinked, like my acceptance wasn't part of his fantasy. "Really?" he asked, a little too quickly. "Just like that?" I gave him a small smile. "You want to be friends? I'm fine being friends." Relief flooded his face so fast it was almost insulting. "I'm glad you're being mature," he said. "I was worried you'd make it difficult." "Nope," I said, and my voice stayed gentle. "Friends is perfect." We finished dinner. Well, I finished mine. Evan mostly pushed food around his plate like he was waiting for me to cry at the end. When the bill came, I paid my half. Not dramatically, not angrily, just accurately. Outside, the night air felt sharp, clean, like the world had reset. Evan leaned in like he wanted a hug, like muscle memory would do the work his words couldn't. I stepped back, polite distance. "Night, Evan," I said. He hesitated. "We'll talk tomorrow?" "Maybe," I replied, the way I'd reply to anyone I wasn't close to. "I've got an early start." I drove home with my hand steady on the wheel. Colin called. The second I pulled into my driveway. "How'd dinner go?" I stared at my dark porch light, the quiet house behind it, and said, "He dumped me. Wants to be friends." Colin made a sound, half laugh, half disgust. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. "I'm good." Then I added softly, like I was stating a rule out loud for the first time. "He wants friends, so I'm going to treat him exactly like I treat my other friends." A pause. Then Colin chuckled. "Oh, he's going to hate that." He was right, because that night I didn't cry. I went into my house, set my keys down, and opened my phone with the same calm I use when I'm fixing a design mistake. Not out of spite, out of logic. I changed my emergency contact from Evan to Colin. I updated my streaming passwords. I removed Evan's spare key from my keychain and placed it in a drawer like it was an old receipt. Friends don't share keys. Friends don't share accounts. Friends don't get access to your life just because they used to. And as I stood in my kitchen, the glow of my phone reflecting in the window, I realized something else, something Evan hadn't considered. Friendship isn't a consolation prize. Friendship is a boundary. And I was about to teach him what just friends really meant. The first morning after the breakup felt weirdly normal. Not because I wasn't hurt, because I was, but because I'd already done the crying in my head during that dinner. By the time I drove home, the grief had burned down into something cleaner. Acceptance. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started my day the way I always did. Emails, schedules, soil notes, a quick glance at weather reports, because a surprise snow in Boulder can turn a job site into a nightmare. My phone buzzed at 11:42 a.m. "Evan, hey, want to grab lunch tomorrow?" I stared at it for a second. 2 years ago, that text would have made me smile. A lunch date, a routine, a "we're okay." But we weren't we anymore. And the thing about being just friends is that friends don't get automatic access. So I responded like I would to anyone else who tried to wedge themselves into my schedule last minute. "Me. Can't. Busy with work." A few minutes later, "Evan, this weekend then?" I didn't answer immediately. I let it sit while I finished a quote for a client who wanted a water feature that looked expensive but low maintenance, which is basically the landscaping version of a unicorn. When I finally replied, it was polite, casual, distant. "Me. Got plans already. Maybe sometime next month when things calm down." Not cruel, not angry, just accurate. Because next month was when I'd have room to breathe. And because friends don't get prioritized over my actual life. A minute later, "Evan, next month? Naomi, that's so far away." I stared at that text and actually laughed. Once, quietly, to myself. This was the first crack. Not in me. In him. Evan didn't want friendship. He wanted the comfort of access without the responsibility of commitment. And now he was realizing friendship didn't come with boyfriend perks. Me, yeah, work's been crazy. I'll let you know. That was it. I set my phone down and went back to my day. 3 days later, he called. I watched the screen light up with his name, and I didn't pick up. Not because I was playing games, not because I wanted revenge, because I was literally on a job site with a contractor asking me whether we should shift a retaining wall 2 inches to avoid a hidden sprinkler line. I let it ring out. When I called back, it was 4 hours later, while I was driving home with dust on my boots and a knot in my shoulder. Hey, I said, speakerphone on. What's up? There was a sharp inhale, like he'd been holding his irritation in his teeth. I called you earlier. Yeah, I said calmly. I was working. What did you need? I just wanted to talk. About what? Silence. That silence was loud, heavy, full of expectation. I don't know, he finally said. Just catch up. We used to talk every day, he added, like an accusation dressed as nostalgia. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and kept my voice even. That was when we were dating. Another silence. Then smaller. Oh, right. I could practically hear him recalibrating in real time. Friends don't need to talk every day, Evan, I continued, not unkindly. Did you need something specific? No, he said, clipped. I guess not. Okay, I said. I'm pulling into my driveway. I've got to go. He didn't say goodbye. I ended the call anyway. Inside my house, I stood by the door with my keys still in my hand and realized I wasn't shaking. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't begging for clarity. I felt steady. And that steadiness made Evan furious, because it meant he couldn't control the narrative anymore. The texts started coming more frequently after that. Evan, miss you. I didn't respond. Friends don't text that after 3 days. Not casual friends. Not the kind you downgrade someone to and then expect to keep emotionally leashed. Evan, what are you up to? Me, work. Evan, want to come over and watch that show we were watching? I paused, thumb hovering over the screen. I pictured him on my couch, legs stretched out, remote in hand, like he still belonged there. Like he didn't just take 2 years and fold it down into a polite exit line. Me, nah, I'm good, you should finish it though. A minute later, Evan, we could watch it together like we used to. I took a breath, then typed the truth. Me, I don't really do that with friends, but thanks for the invite. That one did it. That one text was the moment he finally understood what he'd done. Not because he missed me, because he missed the benefits. Colin called me that night, laughing before I even said hello. Hannah saw Evan at the grocery store, he said. Hannah was Colin's girlfriend, and she had always been polite to Evan in the way you're polite to someone you don't trust. He looked rough, Colin continued, like confused puppy rough. What did he do? I asked, opening my fridge and grabbing leftovers. He kept asking her if you were seeing anyone, like he was trying to pry information out of her. I smiled faintly. And? She told him you were busy with work, which is true. It is, I said, and it felt good to say it without bitterness. I actually am busy. That week, my calendar was packed. Consultations, revisions, site visits, invoices. My business was thriving, and I noticed something unexpected. Without Evan's constant pressure, without his subtle little critiques, his comparisons, his needy, for us speeches, I had more mental space. I wasn't performing calm for someone who wanted to provoke me into proving myself. I was just living. 2 weeks after the breakup, I was in my garage organizing tools when the doorbell rang. Not the quick tap of a delivery. Not the hesitant ring of a neighbor. A confident, entitled press. I wiped my hands on my jeans, walked to the door, and opened it. Evan stood there holding a paper bag from my favorite Thai place. He looked hopeful, like he thought showing up with food would unlock the old dynamic again. Surprise, he said, lifting the bag. I brought dinner. I stared at him. At the bag. At the way he was standing half a step too close to my doorway. Why? I asked simply. His smile faltered. Because I thought we could hang out, like we used to. I nodded slowly. Evan. He waited, eyes searching mine like he expected softness. Friends don't just show up unannounced with dinner, I said. That's boyfriend behavior. His brows pulled together. I'm not trying to be your boyfriend. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't roll my eyes. I just told the truth. Then you shouldn't show up like this. He exhaled sharply, frustration flashing. You're being really cold. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm being a friend. This is how I treat friends. He stared at me like that sentence offended him. You're acting like I did something terrible, he snapped. You ended a 2-year relationship and asked to stay in my life, I said quietly. That's not nothing. His jaw tightened. For a second, I saw something I hadn't seen at dinner. Not regret. Entitlement. Like he couldn't believe I was allowed to say no to him now. I just miss hanging out with you, he said, softer, switching tactics. And that almost worked, because part of me missed it too. The version of him I thought I had. The warm laughter, the easy nights. But then I remembered the way he'd looked at me across that restaurant table while explaining I wasn't ambitious enough. I remembered the relief on his face when he thought friends meant still mine, just less work. So I shook my head once. Then you should have thought about that before downgrading us, I said. He blinked fast, like he wasn't used to consequences. I took a small step back. Thanks for the food, I added. But I'm not hungry. His hands tightened on the bag. So, that's it? I met his eyes. Yeah, I said, that's it. I started to close the door, not slamming it, not dramatic, just firm. But before it shut, I gave him one last sentence, calm as stone. This isn't punishment, Evan. It's boundaries. You asked for friendship. This is what it looks like. The door clicked closed. Through the side window, I watched him stand there for a moment, frozen, like he couldn't compute the new reality. Then he turned and walked back to his car. 10 minutes later, Colin called again. Hannah just got a text from Evan, he said, amusement heavy in his voice. What did he say? Colin laughed. He said you're being mean. I leaned back against my kitchen counter, staring at the closed front door. Mean, I repeated. As in, I'm not letting him keep the relationship benefits without the relationship. Exactly, Colin said, and he hates it. I looked down at my phone, seeing the silence between Evan's last text and my lack of response. And in that silence, I felt something powerful. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. Because the truth was, Evan wasn't reacting like someone who wanted friendship. He was reacting like someone who'd lost control. And somewhere deep in my gut, a quiet warning began to rise. He wasn't going to let go easily. Not because he loved me, but because he couldn't stand the idea that I might move on without him. By the third week after the breakup, Evan stopped pretending. The friendly texts faded into something sharper, short, pointed messages that hovered right on the edge of accusation without fully crossing it, the kind designed to bait a reaction. I didn't give him one. I was too busy, actually busy. 3 major projects were moving at once, and I'd just signed a contract for a boutique hotel redesign that could easily turn into long-term work if I nailed it. Life had momentum again, and nothing disrupts someone's illusion of control faster than realizing you're not waiting anymore. That's when Colin's birthday came up. He texted me one morning. Colin, backyard party Friday. Grill, drinks, too many people. You in? I didn't hesitate. Me, wouldn't miss it. A few seconds later, another text popped up. Colin, just a heads up, Evan's coming too. Invited him before everything went down. I smiled faintly at my screen. Me, that's fine. We're friends, remember? Colin responded with a single emoji. If I'm being honest, I didn't go to that party with a plan. I didn't go to prove anything. I went because I refused to rearrange my life around someone who chose not to be part of it anymore. What I didn't expect was how wrong Evan would read the entire situation. The night of the party, I didn't show up alone. Not as a statement, not as a strategy. I showed up with Miles. Miles was a friend of a friend, early 30s, worked in urban planning, easy smile, no agenda. We'd grabbed coffee a few times to talk shop, and when I mentioned the party earlier that week, he shrugged and said, "Sounds fun. Want company?" That was it. No build-up, no flirting, no expectations. Just someone pleasant to talk to. We arrived together, laughing about something stupid. Parking, I think. And the second we stepped into Colin's backyard, I felt it. That shift in the air. I didn't see Evan yet, but I knew. People don't talk about it much, but you can feel when someone's expectations crack. I spotted him by the cooler a moment later, and the look on his face. Gone was the casual confidence. Gone was the smug little calm he'd worn since the breakup. Instead, there was shock, then confusion, then something dark and sharp sliding into place. He'd expected me to arrive quiet, alone, polite, available. He'd expected me to still orbit him. Miles handed me a drink and leaned close to hear what I was saying over the music. That was all it took. Evan made a beeline for us. "Hey," he said, eyes locked on me. Not Miles. "Can we talk?" I turned fully toward him, calm. "Sure, what's up?" "Privately," he added, already irritated. I didn't move. "This is fine," I said. "Evan, this is Miles." Miles smiled, friendly. "Hey." Evan barely acknowledged him. "Who is this?" Evan asked me, voice tight. "A friend," I replied easily. "Like you." That landed. Hard. "You brought him here?" Evan pressed. "Yeah," I said. "Colin said +1s were fine." Evan's jaw clenched. "I need to talk to you, alone." I shook my head once. Small movement. Clear message. "I'm in the middle of a conversation." Miles glanced at me, eyebrows lifting slightly, not threatened, Just curious. I gave him a subtle nod, like it's fine. Evan looked between us, disbelief giving way to anger. Can you give us a minute? He snapped at Miles. Before Miles could respond, I stepped in. No, I said calmly. That's not necessary. There it was. The moment. The first time Evan realized he didn't get to demand my attention anymore. His face flushed. You're being disrespectful. I almost laughed. Evan, I said evenly, we're friends. Friends don't pull people aside at parties because they feel entitled to a private conversation. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. I turned back to Miles and picked up the thread of our conversation, asking him about a project he'd mentioned earlier. Evan stood there for another second, just long enough for the rejection to sink in, then turned and walked away. Colin slid up beside me a few minutes later, beer in hand, eyes wide. That, he said quietly, was ice cold. That, I corrected, was friendship. Colin snorted. He looks like he just swallowed a lemon. The rest of the party was revealing. Evan hovered, laughed too loudly, positioned himself where I could see him talking to other women, like I'd suddenly feel competitive. I didn't. I was having a genuinely good time. Miles was funny without trying. Easy to talk to. No subtext. No pressure. At one point, I noticed Evan cornering Hannah near the snack table, clearly venting. Hannah listened for about 30 seconds before shrugging and walking away. That made me smile. When I left, I hugged Colin, thanked him for hosting, and walked out with Miles. I didn't seek Evan out. I didn't say goodbye. Because that's what you do with casual friends at parties. You don't perform closure. My phone buzzed before I even reached my car. Evan, really? You brought a date? I sighed softly and leaned against the door, typing back. Me. I brought a friend. Evan, don't act like that's the same thing. Me. It is. Friends are friends. A pause. Then, Evan, I can't believe you're doing this to me. I stared at the words for a long moment, then replied. Me. Doing what? Living my life? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Then nothing. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A few days later, I was working from a cafe near my office when someone slid into the chair across from me without asking. I looked up, annoyed, until I saw a familiar face I couldn't quite place. You're Naomi, right? The man asked, smiling. Evan's ex? I blinked. Yes? I'm Nolan, he said, his cousin. That clicked. I'd met him once at a family gathering Evan dragged me to the year before. We'd exchanged maybe 10 words. Can I be honest with you? Nolan asked, leaning forward slightly. Sure. Evan's been losing his mind over you. I exhaled slowly. That tracks. He laughed softly. He keeps calling me, ranting about how you're shutting him out and acting cold. I took a sip of my coffee. He asked to be friends. Yeah, Nolan said, eyes sharp. That's what he does. I looked up. What do you mean? Nolan stirred his drink, thoughtful. He did the same thing to his last girlfriend. Broke it off, kept her on the hook, got mad when she moved on. My stomach tightened, not with jealousy, but with confirmation. I figured, I said quietly. Nolan smiled. Most people don't catch on as fast as you did. We talked longer than I expected. About work, about Boulder, about how exhausting it is to date someone who wants options without responsibility. Nolan was direct, calm, no performance. When I mentioned one of my current projects, a gym redesign needing outdoor space, his eyes lit up. That's my field, he said. I consult for fitness spaces. Mind if I take a look sometime? I hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Sure. We exchanged numbers. Professional, clean, uncomplicated. As he stood to leave, Nolan added casually, Fair warning, though. About what? He smiled knowingly. Evan's not going to like this. I watched him walk out of the cafe, my phone warm in my hand. And for the first time since the breakup, I felt something unexpected. Not dread, not guilt. Curiosity. Because whatever Evan thought he'd lost control of, he was right, and he hadn't even seen the real shift yet. I told myself repeatedly that Nolan was just a professional contact. That's what adults do, right? We compartmentalize. We label things neatly so they don't scare us. But even as I said it, I knew this wasn't going to stay in the just work box. It started innocently enough. Nolan stopped by my office a week later to look over the gym plans. No flirting, no lingering glances. Just 2 people who knew their fields and respected each other's brains. He asked good questions, the kind that showed he wasn't trying to impress me. He was actually listening. Most designers forget client flow, he said, pointing to my layout. This works. But if we shift this section, it'll feel intentional instead of crowded. I stared at the plans, then at him. You're right. He smiled. I usually am. It wasn't arrogant, it was matter of fact. That should have been my first clue. The text stayed work-focused at first. photos of outdoor training spaces, notes about equipment spacing, quick feedback. Easy. Efficient. Then one night, after I sent him an updated draft, he replied, "Nolan, want to grab dinner and talk this through in person? Might be easier." I stared at my phone longer than necessary. Dinner wasn't coffee. Dinner wasn't a meeting. But it also wasn't a promise. So I said yes. That dinner lasted 3 hours. We talked about everything except the project. He asked about my business, not how fast it could grow, not how impressive it looked from the outside, but how it felt to build something with my own hands. No one had asked me that before. I paid my half without it being weird. He didn't comment on it. He didn't reach for control disguised as generosity. When we stood in the parking lot afterward, he smiled and said, "I'd like to do this again." I didn't hesitate. "Me too." Then he added, almost amused, "Evan's going to lose his mind when he finds out." I laughed softly. "We're just friends." "For now," Nolan said, matching my smile. Over the next few weeks, we started seeing each other more. Movies, hikes, dinners that turned into walks, and walks that turned into long conversations about everything from work, burnout, to childhood expectations. It was easy. There were no tests, no power games. The fourth time we hung out, we'd spent the afternoon hiking near Flagstaff Mountain. At the trailhead, dusty and tired, Nolan leaned in and kissed me like it was the most natural thing in the world. No drama, no hesitation. Just connection. "Still want to keep this low-key?" he asked. I smiled. "Might be too late for that." "Oh, it definitely is," he said. "My family reunion's next month. You should come." I stopped walking. He grinned. "Yes, Evan will be there." "That," I said, "sounds like chaos." "Absolutely," Nolan agreed. "But I think you can handle it." I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "Okay," I said, "I'm in." The reunion was at his parents' place in the mountains. A big house, wide yard, the kind of place built for loud conversations and too much food. We arrived together, hand in hand. I saw Evan through the window before we even reached the door. The moment he spotted us, his face changed. Shock. Then anger. Then humiliation. His aunt opened the door and welcomed us warmly. "You must be Naomi. I've heard so much about you." Evan stood frozen in the living room, staring like he couldn't decide whether to explode or disappear. "Hey, Evan," I said casually as we passed him. "Good to see you." He didn't answer. Nolan squeezed my hand. "Come on, I want you to meet my dad." The afternoon was surprisingly pleasant. I talked landscaping with his father, helped his mom carry plates, laughed with cousins who clearly knew exactly what was happening, but were polite enough not to poke it. Evan, meanwhile, glared from across the yard, like he was watching his worst nightmare play out in real time. Eventually, he snapped. He approached us while we were sitting on the deck. "Can I talk to you?" he asked me, voice tight. "Sure," I said. "What's up?" "Alone." I shook my head. "Whatever you need to say, you can say here." Nolan stayed quiet, attentive. Evan crossed his arms. "Are you seriously dating my cousin?" "I'm spending time with Nolan," I replied calmly. "That's messed up," Evan snapped. "You know that's messed up." "Why?" I asked. "Because we just broke up." "You broke up with me," I reminded him. "And you asked to be friends." Nolan spoke then, voice steady. "You made her single, Evan. What did you expect?" Evan's face went red. "I didn't expect her to date my family." "You don't get to decide who I date," I said evenly. "Not anymore." "Friends don't do this to each other," he shot back. "Friends also don't expect their exes to stay available just in case they change their mind," I replied. People were watching now, pretending not to, definitely listening. Evan realized it too late. He muttered something under his breath and stormed off. Nolan leaned closer to me. "You handled that perfectly." "Practice," I whispered back. The fallout started that night. My phone blew up, calls, texts, accusations. Evan showed up at my office 2 days later without an appointment. I met him in the lobby, calm, professional. "You don't get opinions about my dating life," I said. "You gave that up." "You made a mistake," he insisted. "We were good together." "We were fine until you decided we weren't," I replied. When my client arrived, I ended the conversation and walked away. That was the moment Evan realized he had truly lost me. But he wasn't done yet, not even close. Because when someone loses control, they don't let go quietly. Stop! Part 5, the last word. Evan's spiral didn't happen all at once. It came in waves. A text here, a missed call there. A comment left a little too long on a social media post before being deleted. Each attempt softer than the last, like he was testing whether I'd finally crack. I didn't. Nolan and I settled into something steady, not rushed, not dramatic. We saw each other a few nights a week, kept our own places, respected each other's work hours. When things got serious, it wasn't announced. It just happened. That alone seemed to enrage Evan. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Nolan and I were at my place, half watching a documentary while he sketched ideas for an outdoor training space on a notepad. The sound came suddenly, hard, insistent pounding on my front door. We froze. "I know you're in there," Evan's voice carried through the door. "Your lights are on." Nolan looked at me. "Want me to handle it?" I shook my head and pulled my phone out instead, quietly starting to record. "This is harassment, Evan," I said through the door. "You need to leave." "I just want 5 minutes," he pleaded. "Please." Nolan stepped closer to me, calm but solid. "Do you want me to call the police?" "Give him one warning," I said. I cracked the door open with the chain still latched. "This is your final warning," I said evenly. "Leave now, or I call the police for trespassing and harassment." Evan looked awful, hair messy, eyes red, mascara streaked, something he'd probably forgotten to wipe away in the panic. "I just need you to understand," he said. "There's nothing left to understand," I replied. "You made your choice. Now respect mine." I closed the door. A minute later, his footsteps retreated. Through the window, I watched him drive away. "That was sad," Nolan said quietly. "That was necessary," I answered. A few weeks later came the wedding, a mutual friend's wedding. Evan was there. So were Nolan and I. We arrived together. Evan saw us immediately. I watched his shoulders tense before he forced himself to approach our table. "Can we talk?" he asked me, ignoring Nolan entirely. "There's nothing left to say," I replied calmly. "I need closure," Evan insisted. "You got closure when you broke up with me," I said. "Everything after that was you refusing to accept it." He turned to Nolan, eyes sharp. "And you're okay with this? Dating your cousin's ex?" Nolan smiled, polite, unbothered. "More than okay. I'm dating someone who knows what she wants and doesn't play games. You gave that up." That was it. The truth landed where no argument could. Evan opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around, at the watching guests, at the table full of people who weren't on his side anymore. And for the first time, he walked away without another word. On the drive home, Nolan was quiet. "What's on your mind?" I asked. He glanced at me, smiling softly. "You don't play games. You say what you mean and stick to it. That's rare." "I learned it the hard way," I said. 6 months later, my business expanded. I hired 2 junior designers and moved into a larger office. The gym project Nolan helped with turned into 3 referrals. We were good, solid, peaceful. I saw Evan one last time at a cafe months later. He was with someone new. We made brief eye contact. I gave him a polite nod. Then I turned back to my life. Because boundaries aren't revenge. They're clarity, and once you choose yourself, there's no argument powerful enough to pull you backward.